my favorite speaker and the best, in my view, expert on Russia from Finland is Arkady Moshes, is the from Finnish Institute for International Affairs and the director for the Center for the Russia, EU's Eastern Neighborhood, and Eurasia. He has also expertise, is very high on Belarus, on economy, on Europe, and of course today we will discuss the war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine, and the prospects of ending this war, of ceasefire, short-term ceasefire or long-term ceasefire. What are the prospects for the end of this war? How Russia and Putin would end their war in Ukraine, and how it would affect Putin's future and Russia's future. But also, of course, it's important for us to know how it will affect the future of Ukraine. So, Arkady, it's so great to have you with us. I'm always happy to see you in Tbilisi, but this time we are virtually contacting and communicating. So it's November 7th. It's November 7th, and many of the historians, experts, and the people of our generation recall and still remember this day, which is the day of the great Bolsheviks, Soviet Socialistic Revolution. So exactly on this day, we are discussing the future of Russia, of current Russia, and I don't want to see next Aurora shooting and the next big Soviet socialistic revolution in Russia. But from 3 days taking Kyiv and changing a democratically elected government, now we are reaching the 4 years of Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And we see that Russia's economy is getting worse. Russia is not gaining too much from the Ukrainian, from the war in Ukraine. It's suffering losses, and it may suffer more losses. Let's agree that they are moving forward, but with the very, very high price. So for how long Russia would be capable to hold this, to continue this war in Ukraine, and how it would affect in future the fate of Russia itself and Putin personally?
Thank you very much, Alex, for the kind introduction. Thank you, the Center, for the invitation. Well, you asked so many questions at the same time, I'll probably be lost myself wandering around. But I would start with a couple of small fun facts, which might be an illustration for the further conversation. Yes, it's the 7th of November. And yes, people in Russia, some more jokingly, some maybe with kind of some nostalgic feelings, lament about this. But technically speaking, in Russia today is not a holiday. The holiday was 3 days ago. It was a day of the national unity. Why it's the day of the national unity? What kind of unity was there on November 4, when the Polish troops sitting in Kremlin, or allegedly sitting in Kremlin, in 1612 surrendered? And how you bridge a gap from that time to across 400 years, nobody knows. But technically speaking, I think the only country in the post-Soviet space where it is still the holiday is actually Belarus, no Russia. Well, it's also not accidental maybe that the security services of Belarus are still called KGB. Even in Russia, they're called FSB. And at the same time, the other couple of days, most people were debating the election of the new mayor of New York, who is a socialist. And Russia is not a socialist country, and Putin is not a socialist. So if we go further and start talking about the more serious things in a way, this can unfortunately, Russia can endure this war still for a significant period of time, because Of course, I mean, I usually, as a historian, I do not actually like starting with analyzing individuals, because usually an individual in history is not that powerful. The question whether it is Russia's war or Putin's war, it's both. Of course, without Putin, there would be no war. But without Russian people's readiness to invest, sometimes invest their lives into this war, there would have been no war either. Putin is in the government. He's in the lead. He's taking the decisions. Nobody can tell no to him on the big decisions. And we know Putin. He's more than a quarter of a century of staying in power in Russia showed us that this is the guy who doesn't have the reverse gear. I mean, he is moving forward. And the more resistance he meets, the more stubborn he becomes. Ukraine is an exception for his policies in general, because Ukraine is a country or a policy issue where he has always been losing. It's really personal now. He lost in 2000. He lost the Orange Revolution in 2004. I mean, and he lost it ridiculously because he was supporting Yanukovych so much that he, I think, congratulated him twice upon his victory in the elections, and none of that was the victory. Then he lost another kind of Maidan, and he did not win, although he was thinking that he would be able to impose first on Europe and then on Ukraine the conditions of the future, his vision of the future peace and the future of Ukraine as Russia's satellite, or at least as a country which not be a problem for Russia. And he failed. And we know that the more he fails, the more personal it becomes. So for as long as Putin is in power, I would say that Russia will continue doing in Ukraine what it has been doing. When we go to the economy, yes, we are seeing now first signs that Russian economy is starting having difficulties, partly because of the fact that the sanctions increase, partly because of the fact that Russia is a fairly rich country, but its riches are not unlimited, obviously. And 4 years of 4 years is 4 years. I mean, again, we're talking about psychology of a lot of people. In a couple of months, or maybe 3 months, the war in Ukraine will have been fought longer than the Great Patriotic War. That will be a landmark which will make many people think about what's going on. So obviously, they didn't think it would take that long. They did a lot quite successfully, circumventing the sanctions, bringing the people to the front line. Basically, it's the first time in history when Russia is actually paying its soldiers, and paying very good money. I mean, the signing bonuses in many regions of the last 4 years would sometimes equal to 20 years of salary of each individual man will get. Now we see some backtracking. Not all regions can afford it anymore. But I mean, thus far, I mean, the first thing was sending the people from the penitentiary system, and then they came up with this. Mobilization has not yet been happening. You have since here and there, but they're not big. So the economy can continue for a while still. The budget deficit is still low. I mean, they are raising the taxation. I mean, people will not be happy about it. I mean, but it's the people who are, I would say, small and individual entrepreneurs will now suffer most, because the taxation reform hits them most. Some will be probably out of business. Some will just go into the gray zone. But the rest of the people will probably still somehow manage, because the salaries have also been growing over. So the economy can still afford it. Can it afford it technologically? Yes. Again, because the Russians have showed that despite all the Western talks about them being, slow, stupid, not technologically advanced, there have been some, I would say, discoveries even, I would use this word, I've always been saying that, I've always been having these conversations with the Westerners who would say the Western weapons are better. Yes, but they're also more important, more expensive. And sometimes it's better to have, 1,000 of all guns built in 1950s for that war than one super modern gun it will still be losing. So it has the people, it has, and there are potentially two problematic issues that Russia will be having if the war continues. People will still be getting tired of the war. And this is when there will be kitchen talks, maybe. But how to use that moment, I don't know. The problem is that at the moment, probably still the majority of the people in Russia do not bother to think that there is a war. I don't have that many contacts in Russia any longer, but sometimes I'm talking to people and I'm amazed. I mean, basically, it's for as long as up until your son doesn't have to go to the army, and you yourself do not have to. You're not thinking about the war. This is new. I mean, this I obviously I was already a kind of an adult in the university, and then somebody who finished the university. I remember the Afghan war. I mean, it was talked all over the place, not from 79 onwards, but from 83, 84, definitely it was an issue. Of course, the difference is that then the system was collapsing, and Afghanistan was one element of that collapse. Now the system is not collapsing. But basically, Putin will have to address one thing: a discrepancy between what he himself calls special military operation, not a war, and his some kind of closed wish that people would treat it as Great Patriotic War #2. But this is not going to happen. So something will have to be done. This will be problematic. The other thing which might be problematic, I'm not saying that it will be, but it might. The only thing which Russians are afraid of in the context of this war, or which will make a difference, is empty shelves. Nobody wants to return to the last 2 years of socialism, communism. I mean, I remember I was working in Moscow, in the very center of Moscow. There was a bread shop across the street where we were buying our lunch. The bread was available until 11. After 11, there was no even bread in November and December 1990. No, 91, sorry. So empty shelves, that's what Putin knows cannot be admitted. But of course, Russia is still light years far away from that. As we all agree, and myself as a Russian, I would strongly maintain the argument that, of course, it's terrible. This decision is terrible. This war is terrible. The economic losses are terrible. The losses of human lives are terrible. But the West can do very little about this at the moment. It has to protect itself. It has to help to protect Ukraine. Has to take care of its own interests. Some shifts have been very serious in the last 4 years. Some shifts will still need to happen before the relationship will become, we will know the clear parameters of this relationship. But at the moment, unfortunately, I do not have a good news for anybody that the war will end anytime soon.
You mentioned West's involvement, West's preparedness. Just a few hours ago, the German high-ranking general has mentioned that Russia could start a small-scale war any day soon. I mean, it's very, very soon. It could happen any day, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, with some of the small members of the North Atlantic Alliance or the European Union. Is Europe and is the West preparing for the war with Russia?
Well, first of all, I live in Finland. You know, it's a great country. It's winter. It's winter for half of the year. I mean, Finland does not jump at conclusions. The one thing which you learn here is that people really are pragmatic. They think, it takes them time to think sometimes. What I see here, I mean, there are talks every here and then that, oh, Russia is threatening, it is bringing new troops to the border, it is planning to build new military bases here in the south of the country or in the north of the country. But then there will always be a military spokesperson who will say, we don't see a problem yet. When we see a problem, dear compatriots, we will tell you. But now it's okay. I mean, they say certain things they might be doing. So there's no need to be excessively alarmist. Unfortunately, I'm always asked this question quite often in the last several months, because some people say in 3 years, some people say in 5 years, some people say in 10 years. Well, show me the methodology of your analysis. I can show you mine. And Russia is, Putin is not probably willing to take yet another risk for as long as Ukraine is fighting, and for as long as Ukraine is enduring. And if Ukraine falls, in that case, my prediction would be the first objects of Russian assertiveness would be still Belarus, Moldova, and probably Armenia and Georgia. And this would be the pool of countries which they would try to test their luck on, because these are relatively small countries. I mean, it would be very difficult for these countries to fight for themselves. And the West, if Ukraine falls, that implies that the West will not have helped. So there will no be another Western mobilization to help some of these nations. But I honestly have a difficulty to go beyond that. I even have a difficulty to imagine how would potentially, like scenario-wise, a conflict that would involve Kazakhstan, let alone the whole Central Asia involved. Because when I'm thinking about Kazakhstan, the Russian-Kazakhstani border is the longest in the world. It's 5,500 kilometers. It's longer than the US-Canadian border. I mean, to send your 10,000 or 20,000 troops there, I mean, you will not see them in these plains. So yeah, that's about the probability. But what the other thing which is important, and it's a good development. I mean, it's good that the Europeans started talking about that. They lived in an artificial world. It was daydreaming, and how you call it when people like smoke in the pipe and then push this circles made of smoke fly upwards. Europeans for the last 35 years thought that wars is a thing of the past. It's good that there are authorities who are now telling them, and unfortunately or unfortunately, with Russia or with somebody else, the problems can come, and you need the military power to be able to tackle those problems. So the West is moving in that direction. They're talking about money finally. I mean, it's a typical EU talk. When you say that this money go for defense, somebody will always say, by the way, we need a road, and we need a bridge, and we need an airport, and we need this and that. So of course, some of this money will in the end be spent on something else, which is only indirectly can strengthen the defenses, but they will. And the very fact of spending to bring the military up to the standard, it's good. The problem is not the money, because the money they can find. The problem is the people. Again, I live in Finland, where the universal conscription has never been dropped. Probably every 8 or even 9 boys out of every 10 go to serve, and some females volunteer. So Finland has a pretty formidable ready reserve and a huge reserve altogether, because basically everybody from 21 to 60, all males are in that reserve. And the system is functioning. They're invited for training, depending on their military specialization. And now, of course, that Finland joined NATO, I mean, it is contributing to the security of its NATO neighbors and partners, but it's also expecting to receive the assistance. And it's now practically working through the way how that could and must be done. So without much talk, without much hysterics, this is the country which knows what security is about and what you need to do when you live next door to such a neighbor as Russia. So I'm not welcoming these talks, but still I think it's good that these talks, this remind us that the war might happen, and the less you are prepared, the more likely it is that it will happen. So now that's a new knowledge, and that's good. And it's also good that also Europeans realize that economically they cannot afford to depend on Russia, and that's what everybody needs to understand. If you want to even have good pragmatic economic relations, you should know that they should not grow into dependence. It should always be reciprocal and useful for everybody.
So we all agree, many of us agree that you mentioned in your latest interview, an exclusive interview to Finnish media, that Putin respects, the only thing Putin respects is power. Is West, is Europe, is the United States and its leaders demonstrating the power to Russia in the talks, in actions? Was the decision of sanctioning Lukoil and Rosneft was the demonstration of power in the talks? Would be the providing Tomahawks to and Taurus to Ukraine be the demonstration of talks? Well, is there an understanding in the Western society and the leadership what kind of power Putin respects and what kind of power would put him at the negotiations table?
Well, it's not only Putin. I mean, we have to go back to the very famous Churchill Cold War Fulton speech. I always, because I don't remember all the words, but he coined that phrase. He said that during the war from our Russian allies, I learned one thing, that they respect power, and there's nothing that they kind of respect less than weakness. It's one sentence, but that's a sentence which I should have recommended all young politicians to read every night when they go to bed and after they pray, because this is important. Yes, indeed, I did a quick article, a short op-ed in the Finnish media a couple of weeks back, where I showed them the cases. I showed them the China case, where Putin gave islands on the Ussuri River to China 20 years back, and then the government, then Russia still had the opposition, so there was a debate: is it good or bad? But the government said that this is our analysis. If we give them the islands, we will have a peaceful border and an allied relationship, which was true. Then I mentioned I had the Turkey case, where the relationship is really interesting because there are so many conflicts, and yet it's the relationship between partners. And finally, recently, the Azerbaijan's or Russia-Azerbaijani diplomatic conflict after the Azerbaijani plane was down. The problem is that Europeans simply do not know what power is and how to exercise the power. Europeans have always been thinking about compromises. They have a culture of compromises. They have a culture of win-wins. That kind of war is so bad that you should never go into war. You should manage your contradictions in a peaceful way. Of course, in an ideal world, it's better. But the Americans have never forgotten about what power is and how power could be used. Honestly speaking, when Obama was the president, and in a way, Trump, especially Trump, won, was some kind of ideological, if you want, continuation of Obama's stay. They basically, these people say, why Americans do need to go everywhere around the globe, be the world policeman, spend the money of the U.S. taxpayers, providing this universal good. Yeah, that's an honest question. So if they want to exercise power, that's an open question. But if they can exercise power, yes, they can. It's not that it's not. I mean, it's the 21st century. It's the century where, after all the decades of fighting the unipolar moment with the United States and all that, we're finally moving towards the world consisting of two superpowers. It's the United States and China. I mean, it will not be a repetition of the standoff between the Soviet Union and the USA because of the economic connections between China and the US, but there will be a lot more of geopolitical competition than before. So Americans know how to exercise power, and they are trying. In fact, I mean, now that everybody was afraid that Trump would just, I don't know, give in and give the Russians everything they want to get in Ukraine, I published probably 3 articles at the end of last year and beginning of this year, where I was saying that don't jump at conclusions. I was saying that while in 2016, one prominent member of the Russian State Duma, Mr. Nikonov, who is the grandson of Molotov, for those who do not know it, he opened the champagne during the session when Trump was elected. This time, it took Putin a day and a half, like about 40 hours, before he congratulated Trump. I even play with kind of a hypothesis that when Putin was saying that he would prefer Democrats, that he was actually telling the truth, because Democrats would be weaker. Biden probably would be weaker in terms of exercising power. Trump, during his first term in the office, made quite a number of things. I mean, American rockets, Americans attacked the Syrian governmental troops without asking the Russians. Americans killed the Wagnerite in Syria, and then the Russian government basically said, yes, they are Russian people, but they're not members of the regular military, so they did something wrong. We're not going to go further into that. Several other things, most important of which was giving Ukraine javelins. Obama was not even thinking of giving them blankets. I mean, Trump gave them javelins, and during the first 2 months of the war, I mean, that was one of the weapons which saved Ukraine. No, I'm not exaggerating. That was Trump. That's why when Trump was elected now, Putin, of course, was ready to do things. He was ready to use his usual recruitment techniques and saying nice words to Trump, so maybe to lure him back into the Russian camp. But he knew that it wouldn't be easy. And this is where we are. I mean, Trump is completely unpredictable. Trump changes his opinion 15 times a day, yes. But I mean, so far, what Trump has been, I think he has been learning. And when he says that he is disappointed with Moscow, he means it. Of course, his understanding of a deal was crazy. His understanding of a deal, again, was the same kind of an approach. I get 100% of what I want, and they're happy to give it to me. Putin would disagree. But now kind of Trump is learning by doing. And again, I was always saying that having Rubio as a person holding both positions of a security advisor and the state secretary, this is important because we also know the thinking, the thoughts that drive Rubio. So Americans are trying to exercise power vis-a-vis Russia. Does it mean there will be soon a kind of a good, endurable ceasefire? Probably not, but it would depend on the continuity and patience, strategic patience in the Western policies. Again, one thing which Putin psychologically plays on, he has this thinking that he can outsit whomever. Maybe not that he's immortal, but that, I mean, that he clearly knows that he will be the president when Trump will have retired. Trump will have retired long time ago before Putin will say, I kind of need to go. So Putin thinks that he has this, the pressure of enjoying the time in the office. It's a serious thing. It's a serious driver, but it's not necessarily something that is going to be true. So if the West continues the policy, there is a very good chance that Putin will finally say, okay, now I'm ready to have a real conversation.
And you quoted in one of your interviews one British journalist saying that the coalition of willing is coalition of waiting in Europe. So you still believe that there will be no coalition of willing or waiting going to Ukraine, stationing their troops, at least in the western part of Ukraine?
How will they help in the western part of the Ukraine? I mean, it's pretty clear that especially if Ukraine agrees to lose some territories, the rest of the territories will have to be protected and guaranteed. So without the Western troops, it will not be possible. I mean, Americans, I mean, everybody's talking about the Korean peninsula and the Korean. You probably heard me saying, because I did the calculations once, that even now, I mean, that demarcation line is 250 kilometers, and there are 25,000 at least US troops in South Korea. It's 100 soldiers per kilometer. 100 soldiers. And that's a mountainous terrain. You cannot just send the troops easily there. Imagine if Ukrainian-Russian front line is 1,000 kilometers. So you need 100,000 soldiers. It's not going to happen. Nobody has it. But I mean, some kind of very serious security guarantees would need to be given to Ukraine. It can be NATO. It can be NATO-like something. I mean, but it has to be Article 5 at least. Even the Article 5 is very much about talking. I mean, Article 4 is all about talking, but even the Article 5 is about talking. But there would need to be something of that kind. That's why it's so difficult. That's why I would probably, I mean, in my positive scenario building, there would have to be, oh my goodness. Something is going on. Okay. Somebody was trying to call me because it's, in the middle. Yes, what I was talking about. Yeah, so security guarantees, and especially if Ukraine would need to give something or agree to the freezing. Without the security guarantees, without the Western soldiers, it would be very difficult to guarantee the safe and secure future of Ukraine. But I mean, this is my analytical approach. It doesn't mean that I know who and how will do it. Yeah.
Yes. You also say that Putin puts into the categories the people and the countries, like friends, enemies, and the traitors. So when you accept that among the traitors are those who just joined NATO, I mean, Finland and Sweden, and you will have to price. Do you seriously expect that at some point Russia would go another war with Finland under Putin?
No, again, I mean, I may not have all the information. Well, Sweden is not in this category. Sweden has always been bad guys.
Yeah.
Since Poltava in 1709, or since the days before then, when in the end of the 16th century they were conquering what is now the territory between St. Petersburg and the Onega Lake. But Finland, yes. I mean, I think Putin and people around him had a very mistaken understanding of what modern Finland is. They still thought that was an old, Finlandized or not, kind of a country which would be willing to hear and to listen to the Russian warnings. So they're disappointed, and these people want to make some kind of a revenge for that. I think that, I mean, they will, for the time being, and for as long as I can foresee it, there will be hybrid pressure. Hybrid
pressure.
Yeah, so violations of the airspace, maybe violations of territorial waters. We've seen a number of mini crises here, like the cutting the cable, things which are still painful, but of course, even they're not always successful. But even if they are successful, the thing is that they more irritate Finland against Russia. They kind of make people even more consolidated to say that this is not the neighbor we would welcome, which is crazy. I mean, this is, I don't know for how long it can continue. Later this month there will be the second anniversary of the second anniversary of the closure of the Finnish-Russian border.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane. When I moved to Finland 25 years ago, This border was most open, as open a border can get with a Schengen country. In 2012 or 2013, there were 13 million crossings. 13 million crossings. I mean, people were coming, Finns were going to the Russian side of the border to buy gas for their cars. Russians were coming here to buy milk and cheese. And the pragmatic cooperation between the border guards was great. The diplomatic cooperation was great. There used to be even the meetings, or maybe it was even before between the former war veterans. I mean, can you imagine a meeting between the Russian and German war veterans drinking together? No way. But between the Russians and the Finns, there was a reality. They would sing the same songs and drink the same stuff, and it's all gone. I mean, this was a symbol of cooperation, and now that's a symbol of ruined cooperation. But I don't think we will be talking about the possibility of a real war. That would cost too much, also to the Russians. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so my last block of the couple of questions is related to the most recent summit of the Central Asian countries leaders in Washington, D.C. Since you mentioned Kazakhstan a number of times, we talked about China's leadership and Russia's influence in Central Asia, in South Caucasus. How significant is the summit in Washington, D.C. with Donald Trump? Then the contract signed by the countries, by Uzbekistan, by Kazakhstan, what we know so far is the investments in Uzbek investments in the United States and buying the Boeings, etc., etc. Would it be another area where Putin will back off from its traditional spheres of their influence?
I think that's how the process is going to be. I mean, it's not black and white, because the situation, I mean, I only know Kazakhstan because I had once a project in Kazakhstan. I don't really know the other countries that well. I follow, and there's somebody in my group who is doing the research on these countries all the time. I mean, but I remember Kazakhstani people want to keep Russia involved because they're afraid of China. Mm-hmm. If you talk if you know these people well, so if they're frank with you, they will tell you, look, we've lived under the Russian Empire for 200 years or 300 years, and we're still here. We have our statehood, we have our language, we have our people. Those Turkic nations who live on the Chinese side of the border are basically either being assimilated, or we know what's going on more or less in Xinjiang. Again, in Kazakhstan, which resettled, I think, 600,000 people from China. It was a big thing. And so they say, we want Russia to stay because it can somehow balance China, because otherwise we will be left to China only. But then there's the next stage. They say, but then, of course, we see that China is stronger. That for Russians, it will be progressively more difficult to balance China. So we need somebody else. By the way, I heard the same argument in Mongolia a couple of years, 5 years back. They say Mongolians were a little bit more dismissive of Europe. So are now the Central Asian countries. They say, if we already have Russians and Chinese, and 20 years from now, maybe Russia will be too weak to. So we need to have more of the United States. I mean, what they also do well, this is a relatively new thing. Of course, it only started happening after the death of the previous president of Uzbekistan. Mm-hmm. They now all realize the need to cooperate regionally. They know that they're small and fairly weak countries. If let's say China comes and Russia is weak and America is far away, who's going to help? Only the regional cooperation. So in the last couple of years, we've seen quite an intensification of the regional cooperation, and even things like a demarcation of the border. I mean, we know Fergana Valley, that's a Pandora box, but we see that something is actually happening between these countries, despite all the difficulties. I mean, they're moving forward. So if America is is coming to help, or at least participate somewhat in the economic development, and tries to establish a dialogue full of respect to these countries, it's a stabilizing factor. I mean, it's not day and night. It's not the complete game changer, but that's something which they will do, and I think they have a pretty good chance to attract the United States also when dealing with Trump by means of economic projects. Because again, several of these countries are fairly rich. They have the rare earth metals, they have uranium. Yeah, so there's, and they already have the elites, which is also, I mean, something that needs to be just remembered, and which the Russians probably did not understand properly until recently. Now they probably do. I mean, it's a generation and a half since the collapse of the Soviet Union. A lot of members of this elite by now have studied not in Moscow but in the West. A lot of these people speak very good English. I mean, better than they speak Russian already. And that's changing also the worldview of the elites and the leaderships of these countries.
Including your country, Finland. The president of Finland, Mr. Stubb, was just recently having a tour in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Could we expect European Union as the competitor in this region as well?
Yeah, I mean, competitor, I don't know. It's Europeans are seriously considering the economic cooperation, but they've tried to be there all the time. But I mean, there were many mistakes, and a lot of things didn't work. But EU is not yet considered to be a geopolitical player. It might facilitate the penetration or the economic programs, but it does not necessarily make a comprehensive approach possible. But yeah, that's how it is. But for Finland, I mean, basically, first what needs to happen is that these countries should finally put an end to the attempts to be used to circumvent the Western sanctions. Kazakhstan is clearly doing that. I mean, you must have seen the pictures from the border when thousands of cars are now waiting. Yes. And this is interesting because legally speaking, this is not Schengen. Okay, this is the border control has to be exercised, but there should be no customs control because this is a Eurasian Economic Union, and yet they've done it, and they're doing it with all the seriousness that they can. So they want to demonstrate. I don't know. Of course, you always can find the ways to circumvent the sanctions, but the scale is the answer here.
So last question is about going closer to Georgia, to my country. I mean, President Trump has announced he would travel to Central Asian countries, probably to Kazakhstan, to Uzbekistan. He was involved in August in making an agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia and establishing the Trump route through the Armenian territory from Azerbaijan to its enclave and to Turkey. So it's still time to go to the direction. So a lot of talks about middle corridor, but what about Georgia? I mean, there is less and less talk about Georgia. What should Georgia do to survive and get back on the geopolitical map and the picture?
This is the most difficult question. I surrender. We all know the picture that the picture of Georgia that the West is now seeing. It's not the picture that the West would want to see. I mean, I certainly do not want, again, not really being an expert, but following the developments in Georgia. For America has always been a little bit far away from Georgia specifically. I mean, I don't think in 2008 and 2009, I mean, Georgia was a newsmaker, and after that, I mean, it was not a newsmaker in the West, but in the EU, Europeans were much more attentive, and welcoming. I mean, and Georgia was a member of the European trio, and it received the perspective of the membership perspective in the EU. Again, I'm not saying that this was a done deal. It was a promise. But when Georgia, together with Ukraine and Moldova, received that promise by Europeans, there was a very meaningful fact. Europeans meant it, and now, unfortunately, they mean something else. And I don't know how to change the dynamics, but as I said, this is difficult. The picture of Georgia in the West, and especially in Europe now, is not the one what should be.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. But in the very last clarification question, in upcoming months or years, we see that the process of Georgia's EU integration is halted, and this is because of the Georgian authorities. No one else is to be blamed in this. But should we expect that West Europe, European Union could consider Georgia with its acting ruling authorities as okay for its goals, economic goals, geopolitical goals, making the middle corridor working stable, and having Georgia as a stable area for moving European goods or the goods which are of the interest for Europe.
Yes, economic projects are possible. I mean, of course, for, let's say, your neighbor in Azerbaijan, it's easier because he has more to offer, and that's why the Azerbaijani diplomacy, for instance, has maybe more arguments. But I would say that in the next couple of years, it will be also things which we need to follow is both practical, pragmatic, and symbolic. If the visa-free travel for the Georgian citizens is finally cancelled, that would change the dynamics in Europe in quite a wrong direction, as compared with what they should be from the Georgian interest. We need to follow that. But I mean, I know that there are lots of people in Europe who think it needs to be done, and that I cannot welcome, obviously, but that might happen still.
It couldn't be welcome. So I would be happy to continue this dialogue for next 1 or 2 hours. Thank you very much for your finding time in your very busy schedule. Thank you, Arkady, and thank you for your very valuable insights and the comments and expertise on the future of the regional and global security. And I wish next time we will discuss the status of affairs between Russia and Ukraine. Could be not the great socialistic revolution, but the Swan Lake Opera 24/7, as it was.
Okay.
It was in November 8, 1982, after Brezhnev has passed away. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Arkady.
Thank
I
you.
wish you all the best, and